Okay. So I am a seriously lapsed social worker. I did my training in the 90s when social work was actually arguing about whether it was profession or not. And I think that might be some of the difficulty. But I proudly class myself as a social worker, and I've been doing it ever since. I might be dismissed as not a real social worker because I'm not registered. When I did my social work training, I left feeling like I was the people's representative to the state. But I reckon what I've seen happen is where we are now is that social workers are the state's representative to the people. But I work with social workers all the time, and I don't see many bad people. So it's not some lightsaber duel between the dark side and Obi-Wan Kenobi. What I see a lot is really brilliant people being squashed. So all being squashed in this system of social care that we've created. So if we want a system of social care that liberates citizens, we need to remember that the workers in it should be liberated as well, because after all, they are citizens. So we need to be freed from the latest software upgrade, allowed to make decisions with people close to them and close to their communities. Like Melissa earlier, I think not in pictures, but in silly little cartoons. So this is my experience of working with people with in the looked after children system. So this is a family approach in social services. I'll tell you what would really help me in my family. The social worker says that's not what we normally do. It's not possible. Somebody else says, so apart from the thing that would really help, what else can we do? And the fourth person says, I'll book you on the parenting program. That's a bit trite, but pretty true. And then I did this one earlier. So people don't ring social services or the social care system for interventions. So hello, is that social services? I'd like an intervention, please. Perhaps some solution-focused brief therapy, some task-centered practice, preferably of the antidepressive kind, or failing that, I'd like a set number of hours, please, and then a placement. It's all a bit mad. So Liz talked about person-centered planning. So the question in person-centered planning, what kind of life do I want to live and what would it take to get it? This question that social work traditionally asks is what kind of services are you eligible for and which ones can I give you? And then this great question, which kind of pulled together all of my thinking about me work, was from a man called Richard Orr, who works in an organization called Inclusion WA. And he said the question we should be asking is, how can we be most helpful in your life? And I think that is a great question. So when I do my social work, I'm guided by John O'Brien, actually, who's another name that's come up today. John O'Brien kind of sums up, well, I've used that to sum up what I think really good social work is, which is listen deeply, search for capacities, seek connections, and be open to yes. And that's the thing, that's my rule book. So I've done quite a bit of work, which you can find all these reports. What I've kind of discovered is that for lots of people in the looked after care system, workers in the looked after care system, it's much easier to get your hands on £6,000 for an out of area placement than it is to get £20 cash to really help a family. That's another little cartoon placementitis, I called it. So in this work in Middlesbrough particularly and in Scotland, what I discovered that the system often offers people is the first one is to remove children. It often teaches families to be better. It offers time-limited solutions to fix people in situations, but you have to be referred into that and there's a waiting list. Models, approaches, fancy dances, or programs that will have to push people through. This is what I discovered when I sat down in people's front rooms and asked them, how can we be most helpful in your life, in a very roundabout way. What families really need is somebody to listen, somebody to see the whole picture, cooker, washer, debt, poverty, etc. I remember seeing one family in Middlesbrough who were having a real struggle with the two sons who were causing complete chaos on the estate, and I must have been the 100th worker in the house over the past few years. And the mum didn't have a cooker or a washer, which is unbelievable, isn't it? It's quite difficult to look after children when you haven't got a cooker or a washer. Often families are looking for things that will knock the edges off, and understanding that life is really hard, parenting's really hard. If you add poor housing, poverty, trauma, debt into your life, see how much you drink, see how snappy you get, and see when you snap. That's kind of how I was approaching it in Middlesbrough. This is a quote from a social worker in Scotland who described his work when we're doing this work around looked after children as getting alongside children and families, believing things can be different, and putting solutions into people's own control. And I reckon that's a pretty good explanation of social work. In the work in Middlesbrough, which is where a lot of my experience came from, we definitely did that bit of search for capacities, seek connections, be open to yes. In a system of social care that's cash strapped and being savagely cut, we still spend a lot of money really badly, I would argue. So there's loads of fantastic stories in my papers. One of them that always leaps out is a young woman called Joanna, who was in residential care on the verge of being kicked out because the residential care home couldn't look after her anymore. She ended up back in her mum's. We supported her and her mum to figure out what would a really good life look like for you. How could we support you to live that life? We spent bits of money on really practical stuff like rent arrears, because they couldn't move house because they were trapped in rent arrears. We followed Joanna's gifts and interests, and we got some horse riding equipment, and we put some one-to-one support in for Joanna and her mum. And that was not about teaching them to do anything. It was kind of supporting them to get on together, supporting mum to be a parent, supporting Joanna to be a good daughter. In terms of the money, which staggered us a bit, I suppose, was I did this quick bit of maths after 10 months of working with Joanna and her mum, and the state would have spent £120,000 over those 10 months on ineffective residential care. And actually, to keep Joanna and her mum together, we spent £11,960. The transformation in Joanna was amazing. This little picture she made for one of her workers, to such and such. Thank you very much for the help you've given me and my mum. I hope you like your cakes. People who knew Joanna before that would say that she was incapable of being that nice because she was described as a monster, a big bad reputation in services. So there's loads of other examples of how we sit down, figure out with families how we answer that question of how it can be most helpful. In my day job at New Prospects, where I'm not a social worker, but I'm always a social worker, we do something called shared management, and these two stories are kind of hung around a really good social worker who rings me every 6 months and says, "Thank you very much for doing my social work for us, Tim." This is a man who lives quite chaotically, doesn't like formal support, doesn't like support workers, doesn't particularly like me. What I have done is worked really closely with him and his neighbours and the people that he knows in the area that he lives. He very often hasn't got very much money, especially during COVID. He's and it's another whole long story. But
1 minute.
Okay, I called in to see the local newsagent who I now know is called Graham, and Graham was saying, "I haven't seen Bob for a while. He hasn't got any money." So the solution for Bob was to spend £35.80 a month to pay his papers. So Bob goes to see Graham every day, picks his papers up. Graham has a chat with him, and Graham rings me if he has any concerns. I reckon that is pretty fantastic social work. This is a quote from a man who approached a specialist autism provider who, if you can read that, it's not very specialist, that do support in 6-hour blocks and charge £25 an hour. He bought some gym equipment with his individual service fund. He says really clearly, if it wasn't for that gym equipment, I wouldn't be here. And this is my last slide. And it says, what I reckon good social work is know the people, know their people, know their patch, listen deeply, ask or try to discover how can we be most helpful in your life. And when you figure that out, you respond really quickly. I've been criticised by social workers as people saying, that's just old-fashioned social work, Tim. Like that's an insult. And my answer is, well, go away and do something. That's what the end.